Hi, my name is Dan Zeilinger, and I have been a world-traveling full-time trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of my most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials across the world. I've met many people during my career and have spent many hours on stage and off with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on the weekends with friends. I think they all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, I'll be sharing them with you.
Hi there, this is Dan Zeilinger from Trad Jazz Today, and my very special guest is a gentleman who is a bona fide, in my eyes anyway, a bona fide genius. He plays everything from penny whistle to pipe organ. You like the alliteration I did there? And the amazing and talented Mr. Les Deutch. Hi, Les.
That's Dr.Les Deutch.
Well, only when it hurts.
Hi, Dan.
Good to see you again. It's been a little bit since the last time we ran into each other at a jazz club, I guess.
Or maybe at a gig.
That's true. That's
true.
Hey, other than all the stuff you sent me, I also did some of my own research, so you can start shaking in your boots now. But I saw that you had done an LA Times interview.
I've done several LA Times interviews.
Well, one in particular I wanted to ask you about, and I wanted to know how you felt about the fact they referred to you, Deutsch, a brisk, fast-talking man with a eroding hairline.
Well, now it would be eroded hairline.
I just thought it was hilarious that I think they were talking to you about JPL.
Yeah.
And that's how they led the story. I can take his name down if you want to take out a hit or something.
Yeah.
And I also learned all about your father doing this research.
So I was going to bring that up if you didn't. So
well, here it is. But I was wondering exactly what it was that he was responsible for in that field, because I know how sampling works, and I know how those algorithms work. What all of that was that his doing?
All of that in the first time, a real-time piece of hardware that you can actually play. People had been experimenting with music software in sampling for quite some time, where you would get the computer to generate the wave shapes, you'd write them to a tape, and then you'd play them back faster, and you'd hear them.
Oh, okay, I see, yeah. Well, it's only sampling peaks and valleys, right?
Yeah.
At certain intervals.
Yeah, so what my father did for the first time was take advantage of a new technology, these VLSI, large-scale integrated circuits, to actually build something that could do those computations fast enough so that you could play a sampled system back.
Oh.
And the first commercial product using this technology came out around 1970.
That was the Allen Company?
The Allen Organ Company, which is still in business.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah.
But something you didn't know about me is I actually used to work for Organ Exchange, which was a Lowry dealership, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had my wrestling matches with digital technology.
So in your research, did you come across, that was Ralph Deutsch who did that series of inventions.
Hang on, just say, Aaron, do we want to go, we're not in split screen yet. I'm sorry, this is my son who's my IT tech.
Yeah, I don't see him, but I feel his presence. There he is.
There. I paid for this studio time. No, I'm kidding.
It's expensive.
Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. As you were saying.
Yeah. So my father was Ralph Deutsch, but there was also a very famous musician engineer involved in developing electronic music named Herb Deutsch.
I didn't see that across my stuff.
So he may even be more famous than my father. Herb Deutsch is a first cousin of my father, younger, so he's still alive. He lives on Long Island, and he worked with Bob Moog.
Okay, sure.
And it was an engineer-musician team that came out with the first keyboard synthesizers. Okay. And that was my first cousin once removed, Herbert Deutsch.
Ah, so it was a double Deutsch.
It was a double Deutsch, and they didn't know about each other's achievements until way later.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they reacquainted. They knew each other as kids, and we reacquainted after they both made marks in the music industry at the NAMM show, at the North American Music Merchant Show.
Yes. Where you and I meet annually.
Where we meet, and that's right. If we're not at a gig, that's probably where I see you.
That's really interesting. Another thing you didn't know about me, which you don't need to know about me, actually, so we'll just skip it. No.
But this isn't about you.
Well, but it always is. I mean,
That's true.
The world does revolve around me, if you hadn't noticed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I downloaded that, and I downloaded your list of instruments. I don't have time to name them all.
No.
But you own one of everything.
I own a lot of instruments, yes.
The only ones that really, I guess I shouldn't have surprised me. Of course, you've got a collection of shofars, but that doesn't surprise me, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But if for the goyim watching, can you explain what those are?
Very good. The shofar is a horn of an animal, usually a ram. It's a ritual trumpet-like instrument that's played for Jewish holidays.
Yeah.
And if you know your Bible, the walls of Jericho weren't blown down by a series of trumpet players. They were blown down by a series of shofar players.
Oh, see, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is pure speculation, but you look at Harry James and Ziggy Elman and a lot of the big band soloists and the hot trumpet players,
Mm-hmm.
Were all of the Jewish religion persuasion.
Yeah,
I wonder if that's connected. Not Bix.
Not Bix. Yeah, but Manny Klein, who was very, very close to me, was Jewish and a big influence.
Yeah, I guess buzzing your lips early on could have something to do with it.
I would think so.
It's pretty amazing. Your whole family is just incredibly fascinating, which really pisses me off because this show's about me. No, I'm kidding. Tell you what, I met you, of course, when we were both, you were playing with the Hot Frogs. You were with them from the beginning?
No, I joined the Hot Frogs fairly late. They actually tried to get me to join once before, and I couldn't for some reason. I think they were going on a cruise or something, and I couldn't get away at that time.
But see, one of my most recent interviews was Mike Marois.
Oh,
who was their first tuba player.
So Mike and I used to be very good friends, but I've lost track. If you have contact information, you should send mine to him or one way or another.
I do, and I'll relay it to you.
Yeah, Mike and I used to be very close. And I did play in that band. That was my first circuit band, the new Bullmoose party band, where Mike played tuba. And I played piano. Right. Mostly.
They had a host of people going, of course, on tuba. They went from Mike to Dave to me. And with some...
that was the Frogs.
Some Jim Mayhack thrown in there for good measure, and a couple other, and you on tuba.
And I sometimes at a festival I would play tuba depending on who couldn't make it or so forth. And also when Jim Mayhack was playing tuba, if he had a vocal, he would switch to piano and I go to tuba because it's a lot easier to sing from the piano than from the tuba.
I found that out just recently. And it's also another interesting thing about being a tuba player is when you walk up to a campfire with one, people just scatter. It's not like guitar or banjo with it,
If you can walk up to anything in a tuba, you're pretty strong.
Well, what can I say? And now you're playing pretty regularly with Chet Yeager, who's also agreed to come on and give us a chat.
Okay.
That should be fun.
I play regularly with him, except of course now we're not playing at all. But yeah.
Well,
when we play, yeah.
So tell me about Kaband.
About which band? Oh, Kaband, the KA band.
And why that name?
Okay, so my day job is working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is a NASA center, or the people that send rovers to Mars and so forth. My personal job is deep space communications. I figure out ways and then manage the networks and so forth that allow us to communicate with our spacecraft that are visiting other planets. And one of the things that makes the communications better is going to higher and higher frequencies. So around the time that I was forming a jazz band, we were in the midst of moving to a new frequency for deep space communication. called KA band.
Oh,
So the various spectral bands that are allocated for various uses through the United Nations originally were given letter names. That was to confuse the enemy. And it confuses people still to this day. But the KA band, the particular frequency we're talking about here, is about 32 gigahertz. So that's like a radio station at a very, very high frequency for deep space.
okay. The concept
So-
for that group sounded to me kind of like a JPL version of Firehouse 5.
Except that the KA band is actually a straight ahead, like bebop kind
Well,
of.
that's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah. So very contemporary jazz for me, jazz from the 60s and 70s.
But it's all made up of engineers and employees of JPL?
Or Caltech.
Okay.
Yeah. So JPL is actually run by Caltech. We're all Caltech employees. But some of the band members work at JPL and some of the band members work on campus on the school part.
Now, you play mainly trumpet with that group?
No, I play almost entirely keyboard with that group.
Oh, okay.
So it's electronic keyboard so that I can play different sounds and like play saxophone sound against the trumpet player. It's a jazz quartet. So
Okay.
it's trumpet, piano, bass, drums.
I don't think in your bio you stated how big the group was, but
Well, maybe you think it's bigger from the recordings. In which
Yes.
case it helped. That's because of all the various keyboard things that we do.
and then you have a kind of a gigging wedding band called Living Stereo.
Living Stereo. That's my too expensive to get a gig band. I've played in casual bands my whole career. And sometime I decided, I just want to do it right for once. And so it's a 6-piece band, very odd 6 pieces, 2 trumpets doubling on flugelhorn, a reed player that plays mostly piccolo, alto sax, and clarinet, and piano, bass, drums. And I usually play reeds in this band.
Okay.
And it's all charts. I have a book of well over 100 charts for this band. Everything from straight ahead jazz to pop tunes to disco to klezmer.
Okay.
A lot of reduced big band tunes.
That makes you easy to hire.
Except for our price. Except for our price. I decided that when this band plays, it only gets the best musicians, and so it has a steep price tag with it.
Well, that explains how come I haven't been on the band. But
Yeah. There's also no tuba book.
speaking of tuba books,
Yeah.
I realized that one of the times that we played together, I was playing trumpet and you were playing tuba. With the
Yes,
Frogs.
that is right.
And that kind of blows my personal mind.
That's just how versatile we both are.
Well,
And I think
Yeah,
I think you were using my trumpet.
it may have been. This is when Mike had some problems, of course.
Mike was having some trouble at the time, and I had my trumpet with me, and I let you borrow it.
Right, and we just kind of made the switch.
Yeah.
Not too bad either, except I found out what it was like to be in the front line with Joe Ashworth, which is a whole nother experience.
That is, unfortunately, you can't have him as a guest.
It's different from being in the back line. It was
It is. It is.
a
Yeah.
realization. Oh,
Yeah.
now, but while we're on your family area, when we were talking about your father and such, let's talk about your son a little bit.
Sure.
The story for me is my son came home with a CD and was raving about his band. He said, "Dad, have you seen these guys?" And he holds up one of your son Elliot's CDs, Elliot Deutsch Big Band. And I looked at my son and said, "I've known him since he was 10.
That's right. So I started taking Elliot to band rehearsals when I was in the new Bullmoose party band. So he must have been 2 or 3 years old, and he would crawl around and play in front of the band while we were playing.
So that was also with Mike Morroy then.
Also with Mike Morris, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jazz was with him from a very early age. He's hung around with me for all the various bands. And one thing most people don't know about him is he was probably an equally good mathematician. When he started at UCLA, he started in both music and math.
Oh, you're going to screw up his reputation for his music gigs if you make that public.
He eventually had to choose between the two because he just couldn't make the schedules, with all the various courses fit.
You would think that he could come up with an algorithm to make that work, but
Yeah, unfortunately, he couldn't do that. But he's an excellent musician, and an okay math person, which makes him awesome for figuring out finances for bands and so forth. What he mostly does is arrange and compose.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's his big living, and then the big band plays once in a while, but it's the creative outlet for him.
Well, our kids have ended up hanging out every so often, of course, because when we were both doing the frogs, which brings me to how's your daughter doing?
She is doing great. She is now a partner at her law firm. So I think she'll be out earning me in another couple of years.
If I switch my name to Deutsch, can we all be as successful? I'm just asking.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's amazing. You obviously are very proud.
We are, of both of them. And by the way, if people want to hear some very new things of Elliot, during the quarantine, he's been doing one of these video collaboration projects with his band. If you search for Elliot Deutch Pandemonium,
okay,
there are 3 recordings, audio recordings out of his band during lockdown.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, now where can people find your music?
Probably at my website is the best place.
Which is
nightbloomingjazzmen.com, and then click on Les's space.
I thought that was a little cheap that you're using. I know you have the domain to that, but
it's my domain.
But still, I think you take that too literally.
Yeah. The amazing thing is it wasn't taken.
Well, I guess.
nbj.com was taken, which was my first choice.
Well, good. So your music is, what type of music is available on your website?
Wow. Okay. So there's jazz. You can hear many samples of the KA band, which is straight ahead jazz. You can hear some klezmer. You can hear some of the Living Stereo, some snippets. There are tons of organ recordings, because that's my main instrument, concert organ and theater organ. And wow, concert band stuff that I've written over the years. Okay. I do all the arranging and play the organ for Caltech commencement every year. We have organ, brass, percussion, and glee clubs for that. So there's a lot of that music online. So just a lot of stuff. Oh, and Raymond Scott. We haven't talked about Raymond Scott.
I haven't got to Raymond Scott yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of Raymond Scott there you can listen to as well.
Are you an equal fan of some of the other cartoon composers?
I'm a Carl Stalling fan. I always have.
Me too. You've heard the project, obviously.
Yeah, so I was introduced to Raymond Scott's music through Carl.
Okay.
Of course. But I've not done anything as deep as I have with Raymond Scott. I mean, I just really fell in love with that music. Basically, I put a band together for my son's, Elliot Deutsch's, bar mitzvah, where we played Raymond Scott music. And it was probably the first time it had been played in years. It was before the revival that sort of happened.
He write Powerhouse?
He wrote Powerhouse. That's his most famous tune.
I've used that in, okay, here's a really left turn, but I've used that in my drum and bugle corps shows before.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I wrote a all trumpet arrangement for Elliot when he was in UCLA marching band. I don't know if they ever used it. Yeah.
I know how that goes.
For people who don't know Powerhouse, it is the iconic tune representing the machine age and assembly lines. If you just think about that, that's Powerhouse. And that was Raymond Scott's most famous composition. But there's lots of tunes that he wrote that you would know because they were used in all the cartoons later. And it's just music that permeates our consciousness.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. And so you've got, what was your project with him and what does that involve? So
it was interesting. I transcribed from original recordings. So I couldn't find sheet music. So I got the original recordings and transcribed 4 tunes to play at Elliot's bar mitzvah. And then I did a 5th tune, one of his big band tunes called At an Arabian House Party. And we played it at a Caltech concert that year. And that recording got posted someplace, and the manager of the Raymond Scott archive found out about it and wrote to me and said, have you transcribed any of these other things? Because it turns out
And
that,
pay us this much. Oh,
yeah, Raymond Scott didn't believe in writing down his arrangements. He didn't believe in sheet music. He wanted his musicians to completely internalize the music. So they developed it in recording studio, and they just played the parts back and forth until it was right, and then recorded it. And so nothing was written down, which makes it really hard for people to recreate.
I would imagine.
Since I had transcribed 4 of them, I just kept going, and now I've transcribed about 50 of them, which is most of the library of his 1930s quintet band, which had 6 people in it, which is another whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And lots of bands have used the sheet music either directly or used it as a basis for other arrangements. And it's really helped revive the music.
Yeah, transcribing by needle drop is not an easy thing. Kudos to you.
I have a neat program from the UK that I use called Transcribe, exclamation point, I believe. Let me just check that. Yes, it's called Transcribe, exclamation point, which is a nice little audiophile player that could slow things down and transpose.
And keep things in the same pitch.
And do a little Fourier transform. You can capture a piece of the music, and it'll show you what frequencies are in it, which helps you find missing notes.
So another digital use of that technology.
Yeah, most of these transcriptions I did on my myriad airplane rides working for JPL.
Just as a nerd question, what do you use as a manuscript software?
I use Finale.
Me too.
I've used Finale forever. My son uses Sibelius. And so we'll have those arguments all the time. But at least we're both Mac users, so we don't have the platform arguments.
That's true.
Yeah. But basically, you can do everything in Finale, and you can do everything in Sibelius. Depends on what you're used to. The learning curves are steep for all of these. And so if you've invested the time to master one, you might as well stick with it.
I mean, I started out back in the day with Cub and, some of those things, which kind of made a logical transition into Finale. So that was
I got you beat on that one too, because although I started on Professional Composer, I think, I actually started by writing my own in the 80s, early 80s. I wrote my own music publishing software that used a pen plotter.
Well, I actually did something with the Commodore 64 that was actually was a cut and paste graphics program, but it would turn out sheet music.
Mm-hmm.
So
mine was supposed to be somewhat smart. It would take a 4-part piece and space the notes, so you didn't have to do that. Yeah.
Look at us.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, tell you what, I'm going to go to my. Did you get sent one of my little questionnaires that I used?
Yes, I did.
Let's go through that. What do you think?
Okay.
Okay, that first one is: do you remember the first time you realized you liked music?
Well, I don't remember the first time I realized there was music, because there always was music in the house. So we already talked about my father. His main instrument was the trumpet. So in addition to being a physicist and a mathematician, he had a degree from New England Conservatory in trumpet. And so some of my earliest memories are of him playing the trumpet or trying to bang out a tune on the organ that was always in the house, while I would ride my Wonder Horse. So we're talking about early memories when I was like 2 or 3 years old, just barely remembering these things. So, and the music he would play, if he was playing, would mostly be Sousa marches.
Okay.
And if you put recordings on, there are almost always classical music or opera, which is even like super classical music.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we listened to the live Metropolitan Opera broadcasts in the house when I was little, and we watched the Boston Pops TV broadcast every week.
So was the first thing you laid hands on with the piano or keyboard?
We didn't have a piano. In the house we had an organ and we had trumpets, and that was it. So the organ was always there if I wanted to go bang on it and try to find tunes and so forth. And the trumpet was the serious instrument. And it was sort of the family instrument. So Elliot's a trumpet player also. We're all trumpet players.
Now, was your dad playing jazz?
No. My dad played classical music.
How did you end up in jazz?
So that was interesting. Sort of 2 things pushed me into jazz. One was the public school program. So I couldn't play in the junior high jazz band because it met before school and I took the school bus. So I couldn't get there in time. But as soon as I got to high school, I joined the big band in high school, the jazz band.
What high school was that?
Van Nuys High School.
Okay.
Still there. A little school that at the time had 3,000 students in it in 3 grades. So I was in a grade with 1,000 of my closest friends. But the big band was only 17 pieces, and I was in that, so I was very lucky.
And you played what in that?
I played trumpet.
Okay.
Yeah, I played either second or third trumpet. I wasn't good enough for lead. We had one trumpet player in the school who was better than I was.
He could actually play a high C?
He could play even higher than that. He had a good G. Had a good double
wonderful.
G. Yeah. At the time, I had not a bad double G at the time. But the interesting thing was I got to play lead trumpet in the marching band because he was the drum major. So he wasn't playing trumpet.
Great.
But my main instrument, of course, is the organ.
Sure.
And I was always fooling around on the organ at home. And then finally, when I got to be 11, my parents decided it was time for me to have organ lessons. And luckily, my father didn't teach me to play the organ. He found a real organ teacher for me.
Jimmy Smith.
It wasn't, no, this is a classical organ teacher. Somebody nobody's heard of anymore.
Okay.
I still remember my audition. You had to go and audition for private lessons. And it was at the First Methodist Church in Hollywood, First Church, which is that big concrete Gothic church that's on Franklin.
Okay.
People might know it from various movies. It's a very famous church. And I got there, and it was the first time I'd ever played a real pipe organ. And it was a big pipe organ. It was a 4-manual, 4-keyboard organ. And I was just in heaven. But the audition mostly consisted of going down to his studio underneath the choir loft, where he had a pair of grand pianos. And he sat at one, and he sat me down at the other one, and he played melodies to me, and I played them back. And that was the audition.
Let me ask you a technical, well, not really technical. I guess it would be considered technical because it's about technique. For up and coming organists, what are the kind of exercises you can use for the separation between your hands and your feet?
I've never worried about that.
You see, when I was playing organ all the time, that was one of the hardest concepts because I came out of playing a single line trumpet. I came out of playing a single treble clef instrument. And when all of a sudden I had to play changes and melody line and then bass lines with my feet, that was a hard concept for me to grasp.
Yeah, I see. I can't ever remember that being a problem because I had always fooled around on the organ, including the pedals, as much as I could reach them. And before I auditioned, I had taught myself several small pieces of Bach. So I was sort of past that stage, except I developed all sorts of bad habits teaching myself that I had to unlearn. So as an example of the kind of exercise you should get in studying the classical organ, when you study trumpet, you do your scales. When you study organ, you do your scales, each hand separately, feet alone, and all together.
Okay.
And you just get used to the pedal, toe pedal, toe heel technique on the 2 feet to play the various scales.
Okay. My next question is, when was the first time you played jazz? I'm talking about real jazz, not just sitting in a reading high school jazz band.
Well, I thought the high school jazz band, it's you mean real jazz in the sense of like trad jazz where everybody's improvising.
Well, not necessarily trad, but were you improvising in high school?
Yeah. I wasn't a great improviser in high school, but I was improvising. I think I learned to improvise in college, mostly from listening to recordings.
Was that Cal State Northridge?
No, I went to Caltech.
Okay.
So I have 3 degrees from Caltech, a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD. So I was there for 8 years, and I played a lot of jazz there. It's where I played my first Dixieland jazz. It's where I played my first straight ahead jazz in trios and quartets. So, I mean, there are a number of good jazz players there, some on faculty, and I learned from them and learned from recordings. So I would say the first band that was like an all improvising band that I played in would have been maybe my freshman year, certainly by my sophomore year I was doing that.
What was the first jazz gig you got paid for?
First, first jazz gig, first gig I got paid for, I was probably 12. I used to work as a rehearsal pianist for a junior choir.
Okay.
Yeah, but my first paid jazz gig was with a jazz quartet. I wasn't the leader; I just played piano in it while I was at Caltech. It was led by another Caltech student who was the trumpet player, and two people who had nothing to do with Caltech. And we got a job at a wedding reception, and we rehearsed 3 or 4 times for it because we had no repertoire, and we went and played it. And I borrowed a piano from Caltech for it because I didn't have a portable piano yet. I borrowed a Fender Rhodes 72.
Oh my.
Yeah, and amplifier and all that.
Just as an aside, my very first playing job as a band leader of sorts, quartet leader, was at a bar mitzvah. And while using a Wurlitzer, I was playing keys.
Ah, yes.
Which
Drive a Wurlitzer not more than 5 feet from me.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
It's in the closet.
They're very unique sound.
It's a unique sound, but if you want it nowadays, there's lots of samples of them on the other keyboards.
Yeah,
so
that's kind of interesting that you were doing weddings and I was doing bar mitzvahs.
Well, the same band did bar mitzvahs too.
Ah.
And we had a Jewish book which I put together. We had a Goyish book which the other guy put together. So depending on we bring them both to gigs if we needed them, and we played. Maybe for the next 7 years until I graduated from Caltech finally, in that band in one form or another, playing maybe 2 casuals a week, because you could do that back then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because when I have tuba students, I always kind of encourage them to go into jazz because they can make money as opposed to waiting around for somebody to die in a symphony.
And there's only one tuba chair.
Exactly.
It's not like violin where there are tons of them.
Right.
And fewer players. Yeah.
10 or 12, yes, at least.
What you really should do is tell them to switch to viola.
Well, or French horn, actually. French horn's that's a pretty good scholarship instrument, too.
Yeah, I got a couple of French horns sitting up here, too.
I don't think you listed those.
It's not one of my favorites. I've played French horn. I'm even on a recording playing French horn. I consider it the most difficult by far of the brass instruments.
Oh, I agree. The parts of the series is so close together.
Yeah. It's like playing trumpet in the super high register all the time.
It's interesting. My son, who came up as a trumpet player, went to Azusa Pacific for his music, and actually, I think, if the truth be known, he just couldn't get along with trumpet players, and he switched to horn because they needed the horns in the orchestra there. And so he had to learn that pretty late in life, about the partial series and how squirrely that is. But he did well.
Yeah. So my father picked up the horn later in his life and fell in love with it. That became his favorite instrument. And he played horn in the Caltech band while I was a student there. And also had a horn quartet that he ran at his house, which we used to call the Moose Callers.
You and your names. We got to get together and stop that. Actually, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So back to a jazz question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your single most favorite jazz recording?
So I thought about that, and the snarky response I wrote down for that is wait, let me find it.
You are the king of snarky.
Whatever the last one. Yeah, snarky was probably whatever the last one was that I heard. That's what. So I thought, but seriously, there's some recordings that probably influenced me more than others. Whether they're my favorite now or not, I don't know. There are just so many good jazz recordings.
Okay, I think influential would be a good.
Influential for me for jazz was definitely a recording that Louis Armstrong made with the Dukes of Dixieland called, I think it's just called Louis and the Dukes of Dixieland.
I don't think I've heard that album.
It's interesting for a number of reasons. One, it has Louis Armstrong on it and a superb recording environment, which he didn't normally get.
You're absolutely right.
Top-notch recording equipment, so you can hear everything that he does, which is phenomenal. And he still had chops then. And Rich Matheson is the tuba player.
I actually studied with Rich for 2 weeks.
Ah.
And yeah.
But he's my favorite trad tuba player, or non-trad, depending on your point of view, since he can
Well,
make
you've heard my
anything
playing,
sound
yeah,
straight
anyway.
bass. Yeah.
Yes.
But I learned a lot about bass lines listening to him, and also a lot from theater organ recordings, which I'll come back to. But I think for traditional jazz, things we used to call Dixieland until recent events.
Exactly, which is why my channel is named this, by the way.
Yeah.
It's not that I want to do just nothing but Blue Waters discussions, but besides that, I like the way the logo looked.
Yeah. Well, I could have put a Lou Waters record under, could have put a Turk Murphy record. I mean, I like all those things, but that one and that record I had as a kid because my father didn't have jazz records except for two, because they were for showing off his hi-fi.
Ah.
And that was one, and it was like the Best of the Dukes, Volume 1 was the other one.
My father didn't want, my father made his own stereo, and we were actually living in the country of Turkey at the time, back in the 60s. And so he actually bought two Heathkit mono amps and hooked them together onto a Gerard, an actual stereo turntable. And that's how and then he had a Turkish craftsman build the cabinets. He had a couple Wharfdales in it. But yeah, so that's we had the stereo action records to show off our stereo.
Yeah, we had a lot of the hi-fi records.
Had trains going through the living room and
a lot of living stereo records, which is where the name of that other band comes from.
Oh, well, that's what I meant, the living stereo records, yeah.
Yeah, so they were like the epitome of recording quality for showing off your system. And that was also how my father had some theater organ records for the same reason. George Wright records. I don't know if your fans know about George Wright, who was the master of the theater organ in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Did his stereo system manage to capture a pipe organ? That's actually a rough thing to reproduce.
It is. The George Wright records were actually pre-equalized so that they come out well on stereo systems. And they've been re-released since with flat responses. But the ones I have were, the bass was peaked up so it would come out better and things like that. And that was done on purpose because they were there for demonstrating your stereo.
Ah.
Yeah. And by the way, George Wright was one of the first people to record in 3 tracks.
Okay.
So it was 2-track stereo and a track that was picked up at the back of the hall for ambiance that was mixed in.
So that was before Les Paul's multi-tracking.
Yeah, it was before. It wasn't multi-tracking because it was all done in real time. Although George Wright did some multi-tracking, probably after Les Paul started doing it. So there's some recordings where he plays a second set of theater organ on top of it.
You may find this interesting. It reminded me of a question I asked George Probert once, which was, how did they do that trio singing in Cinderella? Because that was before multi-track also. Remember when they're scrubbing the floor and the bubbles come up? And she's actually singing 3 different parts with us. I said, how do they do that?
Mm-hmm.
And he said they actually had 3 mono recorders that they strung together with rubber bands.
Ooh. It's amazing what you can do with a little bit of ingenuity.
Anyway, I thought you would enjoy that aside.
I do, and there's a Disney history buff in me too. So that's good. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Yeah. Have you ever played? Here's one. Have you ever played jazz on the organ? I mean, as a gig.
Yes. I've played a couple of gigs where, for one reason or another, a jazz band I'm in ends up playing a gig in a place that has a Hammond organ on stage. And if that happens, I will invariably, if I have permission from the club, I'll invariably play some stuff from the organ.
Is B3 your favorite model of Hammonds?
Yeah, for jazz.
Yeah, with a Leslie speaker on the side of it and everything. Obviously, you would like a speaker called Leslie, so it's...
I have no relation to that company. There are all sorts of interesting stories about that too. So yeah, I play jazz organ a little, and I'll always at a regular gig like with the KA band, I'll have an organ sample that I'll use, and I have a little module that emulates a B3 one keyboard.
Okay.
So with the drawbars on it, you can do all of those kind of things. But mostly on organ, I play classical music and theater organ music, which is music derived from what was used for silent pictures.
Right. Now, yeah, you've done some silent picture scores and such, haven't you?
I have, yes.
Because I know Randy Waltz has as well.
Oh, he does a lot more than I do.
Ah.
I've done a few movies. He's done a lot of stuff. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that. So, in fact, Carl Stalling was a theater organist. We were talking about Carl Stalling before.
That I didn't know.
A lot of the people who ended up doing movie and early animation scores came from the theater organ community for two reasons. One, the theater organs didn't have any use for them anymore because talkies had come in. And two, they knew how to score for movies because they had been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
By themselves.
That's interesting.
And so they had learned all those things. And so it was a very natural thing for theater organists to become a movie scorer.
And didn't Fats Waller do a few recordings on organ as well?
Fats Waller did a number, and he was also a theater organist and played in movie theaters. And quite a good organist. Very underrated. He hardly, in fact, maybe never got a chance to record on a really good organ with good recording equipment. The stuff we have of him, it's just a taste of what he probably sounded like.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Count Basie was also a theater organist.
No, I had no idea about either of those guys.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm trying to figure out how that would relate. I don't think it really relates to his music much.
Yeah.
Although I have to admit his Black and Tan Fantasy and those things that was Ellington, wasn't it?
That's Ellington. Yeah. Who I don't think was a theater organist.
Ah, thank goodness. I was getting tired of that. No, I'm kidding. So one of the things I found that was really hard to look up for you, other than the obvious ones, but what Dixieland bands have you been in?
I've been in tons of Dixieland bands.
I imagine, but I could only find a few of them, like Bullmoose and Frogs and Night Bloomin'.
Oh, that's certainly true. I started in the Caltech Dixieland Band, which was mostly a faculty band at school. I was drafted because they didn't have any other piano player. So I learned to play Dixieland piano in that band. In fact, the trumpet player in that band was a professor who used to play in the Salty Dogs before coming to Caltech.
Okay.
And he had a good Dixieland, traditional jazz library, which he let me borrow of records, and I learned a lot from that. Then I went to the new Bullmoose party band where I played, again, mostly piano, but also I arranged for them. And when I did, I made sure there were things where I could play trumpet and piccolo. So there were two trumpets normally in the band. So we can have shout choruses with 3 trumpets on them.
Wow.
Which was really a powerful thing.
And annoying.
And annoying. And of course, I was in the Hot Frogs where I mostly played piano, but also sometimes got to play trumpet or piccolo. I played in the Bix Beiderbecke Memorial Jazz Band for a number of years. The band that started the Bix Festival in Davenport.
Okay.
I played, as you know, in the 10th Avenue Jazz Band.
All too well.
Yeah, where I was co-tuba with you.
Yes, this is true.
Yes.
You, me, and Dan Marcus.
Yes.
In fact, Dan's going to be coming on in later.
Well, say hello. I haven't seen Dan since 9/11, I think.
I know. Hey, listen, before we get off of this, answer me a question about playing Dixieland piano.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys I hear try to do full-on stride when they're playing with a band, and that tends to get really, really busy. What are the nuances to playing piano with the Dixieland band? Literally.
Well, I do play stride when it makes sense. So if it's basically a 2-beat song, if the tuba's playing basically on 1 and 3, I will usually play stride, but I thin the left hand out quite a bit.
Okay.
So I play maybe 2-note chords, maybe 3-note chords sometimes, but not a lot more than that. And if there's a tuba playing at the same time, I generally play only a single note in the bass rather than doubled, except maybe for a shout chorus or something. And I'll almost always play longer notes for comping in the right hand, which will smooth things out. So a sort of stereo thing would be to play an umpa stride in the left hand with half-note chords in the right hand as just basic behind the front line.
Okay.
If you're solo, then you can do anything you want. And of
Right.
course, if it's not a 2-beat tune, then you've got to do something else. And then it depends on whether you have a strong banjo player or not. If you don't, then I'll almost always play 4-beat with just repeated chords in the left hand as if I were a banjo player. Just to keep the pulse of the band going, and then anything I want in the right hand.
Yeah,
if there's a banjo player, I can back away from that.
I think for the younger players that are going to be watching this, I think that this is an important discussion, you know?
Yeah, I should probably charge for it.
Ha, ha, ha. Well, it's not that important.
No, it's not.
Now, I see you on a couple of banjos, but I've never seen you play banjo.
I don't play banjo very much. I love the banjo. I've always wanted to play banjo better. My hands are very small. As a keyboard player, I've learned how to get around that. When I play stride, I don't play tenths because I can't. So I play sixths and make it sound like I'm playing that style. And it's very, as long as there's a bass player too, it comes off. So my hands are small, which makes it hard for me to finger the fretboard. And so I have a tenor banjo, which I've never been able to play well. I discovered I could play ukulele pretty well.
Okay.
And so I bought a banjo uke. Well, banjo lele.
As I'm sure you know, but some of the audience may not know, I was wondering if maybe, because I know plectrum is a more chord-oriented instrument as opposed to a tenor. Tenor is more of a single line, and your stretches tend to be a bit wider with tenor.
Yeah, and also if you play 3-note chords rather than 4-note, which I really should go back and look at that more. Yeah. The trouble is I've played with too many really great banjo players, and there's a standard there.
Yeah, I understand. And, yeah.
But I play okay just to play in the house, and I'll play a track, like if I'm doing an all-in-one recording with myself or something, I might play banjo on that.
One of my questions here, I looked down at it, and it's really kind of bizarre because we're talking about you. And that is, other than your music and your job, do you have any other hobbies?
So there's more to music than we've talked about. And
but it's still music related. You're talking about
still music, it's composing and arranging, which is a very big part of my life.
Mine as well.
Yeah. So, but other than that, I mean, I have photography. I'm a very avid, serious photographer.
Well, that I didn't know.
Yeah. As is Corey Gem, as a matter of fact, who I'm sure you also have as a guest at some point.
He is coming on. He hasn't come on yet, but we're booking his times now.
Yeah. Okay.
He's great. He's so much fun.
And I've told him I've seen some of his photo displays at jazz festivals, and I've complimented it. They're very nice. So and that's a hobby I inherited from my father, who was also a hobby photographer. One of the few people who took color photos during World War II, because he had access to color film at the National Bureau of Standards where he worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father was a photography nuts too. Of course, back in that era, back in the late 50s, early 60s, almost everybody was.
Yes.
My dad had a Leica, a very nice camera that my older brother ended up getting.
Yeah. But, we were a Nikon or Nikon, if you're a Japanese family. And so I have a closet full of them. I have a couple. I have like a Nikon F and a Nikkormat, from the analog era.
Sure.
We have a couple of digital SLRs and a whole collection of lenses. When I travel, I still carry lenses and SLR bodies with me everywhere I go.
As long as you don't tell me you've got a room full of Rolexes. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Real expensive.
No, I don't have. Well, these are expensive enough.
Yes. My older brother is a photographer. So.
Okay.
He's got this crazy collections of antiques and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I asked you also, I looked down at this and it says one of my questions is who are the up and coming jazz players, but your son is one of the up and coming jazz players.
He is, and I'll probably leave it at that.
So you fans out there who like big band and just that sort of jazz, you really need to listen to L.A. Deutsch's band. It's pretty phenomenal in this day and age to have somebody with those kinds of sensibilities when it comes to their arranging.
Yeah, he's like the next generation Gordon Goodwin. Gordon and I used to play in rehearsal bands together when I was in college.
I think he was playing piano.
Not yet. No, he started mostly as a sax player. We sat next to each other and played first and second alto in rehearsal bands.
Les Deutch and Gordon Goodwin playing alto sax next to each other. I've got a picture of that.
Yeah. It was a blast. I learned a lot from him.
Well, I imagine. How could you not? And vice versa, for that matter.
Well, so we were both writing at the time too. So we were both bringing our new charts to the band.
Between us, I know nobody else is going to be listening to this program. But I'm surprised at how extremely 60s his arranging is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, he has a real, he has a real fondness for that late 60s psychedelic style, for big bands, that is.
Yeah. Well, we were all influenced by the various arrangers that worked for Buddy Rich, for instance.
Yeah.
Hank Levy and some of the Sammy Nestico things and so forth.
Well, here we are. And we're about to wrap this up, but let me give you some time here to say whatever you'd like to say.
It's been a pleasure and a good diversion during quarantine. As something else to do for a change in the evening.
It's one of the things that everybody has said, and it really wasn't my intent, but I knew that musicians would be home in order to.
So one of the things, one of the bands I play in, which I didn't mention, is something called the Dad's Band +1.
Okay, I didn't find that in my notes.
It's an obscure band. It's a Pasadena area band. They used to be called the Dad's Band in the old days, until we had a woman musician, the wife of one of the members, and then it had to be the +1. And in fact, Patty Brugman, the one woman in the band, is the leader, but I'm the arranger, and we have a book of about 125 tunes.
Well, at least she didn't call it Patty and her boys, which is
right.
It's what tends to happen in those circumstances.
So I will say that we have been busy during the quarantine season and have 10 new tunes we are just about ready to release, probably for free for everybody, probably accessible from my website momentarily. It's an album called Pandemic with an exclamation point on it. And this is a trad band. So it's clarinet, trumpet, tenor sax, trombone, piano, banjo, tuba, and drums.
Is it all you?
It's not all me. No, it's 8 different people.
Okay, well, that's a different. Because you could do it yourself. I'm sure you have the multi-track capability.
But then I'd still be doing it for another year.
That's true. You'd have to compete with Jim Mayhack's I'd Rather Do It Myself album.
Jim and I always wanted to do a big band album that way, with each of us doing half the parts. And we never got around to it. But this album is interesting in a number of aspects. One is it's got a couple of original tunes inspired by the pandemic, so that I wrote. One is called The Great Pandemic March, which is a stomp in 1920s form.
Okay.
And the other one is the Social Distancing Blues, which has lyrics, but they're not recorded on the album. So I'm going to post a piano vocal version for people who want to go around singing it.
Is it a 12-bar?
Sorry?
Is it a 12-bar blues?
It's a 12-bar blues. There are 2 choruses of lyrics for the blues, and there's a verse.
Okay.
So it's also a 12-bar verse, but it's not a blues form.
Got it.
Yeah. And so just look for that. Look for Elliot's tunes. And I've got an article that's going to come out in Nature Astronomy in a couple months on optical communications in deep space, if people want to read something new of mine in that field.
I'm sure that could be another 4-hour discussion.
Yeah. Well,
not that I wouldn't mind doing that, actually.
It
doesn't fit my channel name is all.
Well, I think your participants, your viewers, might not appreciate this as much.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's fascinating too, in its own way.
Very much so. I actually have several friends in kind of in that industry. But anyway.
Yeah. It's not about you. You keep forgetting that.
Well, my name is on the show.
It is. Trad.
Whoa. I'll take that as a compliment.
That's meant as a compliment, yes.
Les, it's been a pleasure. I hope we get to play again soon together.
I certainly hope so, because it'll be a lot more fun than some of the things I'm doing now.
I can imagine.
I want to get out there.
I don't want to know, but I can imagine.
Yeah. It's okay to, at least on the organ, I can play by myself and improvise. But it's fun to play in a band and do that, and yes. I really miss that.
Yeah, I actually tried recording a couple trap things using Finale. It just doesn't work.
No. Yeah, the samples, it's very mechanical if you do it that way.
All right, sir. We will talk to you soon.
Okay, very good, Dan. Oh, yeah, and you should let me know when this is going to appear or
We
something.
will. We
So
always send,
the one or two people that want to know about it, I can tell them.
We'll always send a note out, and I'll put up a big splashed announcement on my Facebook about it.
Okay, and you're welcome to use any of the recordings I sent as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll talk to you soon.
Very good, Dan. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for watching Trad Jazz Today with Dan Zeilinger. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Videos come out every Wednesday and Friday.